The civil service examination actually select people for 24 different services. But apart from the IAS and IPS, people are not aware about the nature of the other services. Today, we want to take a closer look at the Indian Foreign Service. With me is Vijay Selvaraj, a 2006 batch Foreign Service officer. So let's know about the service from him. Vijay, actually speaking, this Indian Foreign Service, the only idea I have is you represent India in other part of the world. So can you just elaborate on what exactly an IFS officer do?
Okay. Representing India abroad, basically I look at it in two ways. One is when we serve at our embassies and high commissions in other countries. That basically means that in every field of activity, we take India's position to that country, and secondly, we explore avenues of cooperation between the two countries where we are serving. For example, when I was in Bangladesh, trade between the two countries through the waterways was one of the important aspects of my work. So this broadly comes under commercial engagement. So in our embassies, we have a political wing, a commercial wing, a cultural wing, an educational wing, and a consular wing, which is most important because that caters to the needs of Indians who live in that country. They look after the visas, the passports of Indian nationals, and any other attestation facility that an Indian national would require, and assistance to Indian nationals in distress. So this broadly is the function that we deal with in embassies abroad. We would be asked and required to conduct negotiations, like as I was referring to the inter-country trade through the waterways. So anything from a port of call, what are the items that can be traded? Can all items be traded through waterway transport? Then developing infrastructure for such trade. For example, there may be a designated port of call, but it may not have the facility to handle containers. So then we look for enhancement of the facilities available to handle containers. But back home in New Delhi, in the Ministry of External Affairs, that is where much of the action is coordinated. We function from several territorial divisions. For example, the Northern Division handles Nepal and Bhutan. The BM Division handles Bangladesh and Myanmar. So much of what we do in Bangladesh is either emanates from the BM Division, or it goes as a suggestion from our embassy in Bangladesh back to Delhi, where it is reviewed, where it is an interministerial meetings are held to see the feasibility of the proposal that we have sent from Bangladesh. So the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi is the nerve center from which either ideas emanate or where ideas from the missions are vetted, budgeted provisions are made, the OK signal is given for certain proposals, and inter-ministerial coordination is carried out at New Delhi. So it is a closely connected process between the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi and our different missions around the world.
I would like to continue with your training part because
Okay.
all the service after the foundation course, you will be going to the respective academies.
Yes.
And there, what kind of a training is provided to you and how long it is?
Okay. The training currently is about 6 to 8 months long. When I joined in 2006, it was a longer training of about 2 years. Basically, the training is extremely broad-based because when you say represent India abroad, one needs to know most of the activities, the cultural ethos of the country, the different wings of the government. So we start off with a basic foundation in international relations. For example, most of us who are in the foreign service do not have an international relations background. For example, I'm an engineer and an MBA by training, so my understanding of international relations is pretty limited at that point in time. So we are trained, we're given a basic grounding on international relations in the theory and in the practice by several of our senior colleagues who are serving and some seniors who have retired, and also the theory part from professors from universities like the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Apart from that, we are given an economic module where we go to Bombay, we visit the Bombay Stock Exchange, we visit the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force bases in different parts of the country. We do have a village visit. I, for example, went to Bihar. We are typically sent away from our home state so that we get an exposure to life in another part of the country. We are given a huge exposure to culture, to the arts, so visits to the National Museum, to the Lalit Kala Academy, performances by artists in the Lalit Kala Academy, and lectures on several aspects of culture, trade, negotiations. So it introduces us to a large gamut of the functioning of both the government and a backgrounder on international relations and basically the cultural ethos of the country.
What about the language training? Like, are you able to choose a foreign language of your own, or how's it?
Generally, there is a basket of languages which is given to the batch as a whole, consisting largely of the 5 UN languages, which is French, Chinese, Russian, Spanish, and English. English, of course, is not offered as a foreign language. Apart from that, there are several other languages like Myanmarese, Sinhalese, Swahili, Croatian, which are also offered, Japanese and Korean as well. And within the batch, we get to choose amongst ourselves. And I, for example, took Arabic, which is one of the 5 UN languages, which is a 2-year training program. So I was sent to Cairo, where I based myself in the embassy, but my full-time responsibility is to learn Arabic. We were sent to the American University in Cairo, where we did a 2-year intensive training in the Arabic language, and then we pass an examination set by New Delhi. On passing that, we are confirmed into the service. So some of the slightly more difficult languages take 2 years to pass. Some of the easier languages take about a year to pass. Yes, typically like French and Spanish is about a year. Chinese, Japanese, and Arabic are 2 years to pass.
Many a time, some people does not put foreign service as their first choice because they feel that you will be away all your life.
Yeah.
So, say for example, in a 30-year career, will it be always outside, or in that time span, how many years you will be able to be in India?
Okay. This is not something very fixed in this whole approach. There are some who prefer to be abroad. There are some who prefer to be back home in Delhi for various reasons. It could be professional. There could be certain personal reasons which also influence these decisions. I, for example, have come down to Trivandrum as the protector of immigrants right now, purely on the basis of ill health of my parents. But this may not be the case all the time. Some of us may get that opportunity, some may not. But typically, posting abroad is for 3 years. But there are certain posts like in Afghanistan and Pakistan, which would be of 18 months or 2 years duration. Some of the posts are non-family, where the danger associated with being there for the family, or for example, the education available to children. These could determine whether it is a family or a non-family station. So some of us move from one 3-year posting to another 3-year posting, and then typically move back for at least 2 years in the headquarters. So that is by and large the way the posting system works in the foreign service, but this is not a hard and fast rule. There are others who have spent much longer in India and maybe sometimes longer abroad as well.
When you compare the foreign service with the other two glamorous service, the Indian administrative and police service, the two aspects to it, like one thing is the people who are in IAS and IPS may get more media coverage and popularity. So, what do you have to say about that? Like, will that be
Yeah.
a determining factor in choosing this?
I would, if I were to talk to a group of youngsters who are preparing for the exams, I would definitely, discourage people from looking at a publicity, angle to this whole um, examination and took the civil service as a career option. Because I think as public servants, our primary job is to serve the people. And whether that entails a more so-called glamorous role or not is quite immaterial to the officer concerned. And if you are called to do a public oriented role, then you step up to that role. Otherwise, you continue with the basic functions given to you, which I elaborated initially. When you're in missions abroad, our job is to promote our country's interests further with that country and see areas for mutual cooperation. Back in Delhi, we're trying to coordinate and tie up the proposals that come from our embassies and missions and be the font of foreign policy options. So glamour and publicity is something that is which comes if the role so demands.
Mhm.
So yes, we are all spokesmen for the country, so it does involve a certain amount of publicity, but then through the proper channels of approval and after having known precisely what to say, because otherwise one cannot just be voicing one's views, we are voicing the country's views, so there needs to be extra caution and care in that aspect.
You initially mentioned about the embassies all having different wings,
Yes.
cultural, political, and economic.
Yes.
So, does a person who enters the foreign service able to be a specialist in any of them, or you will be sent to different portfolios? How is it?
We are sent to different portfolios and we are expected to have a broad understanding of how to run a particular wing. For example, in Cairo, I did the press information and culture and subsequently a bit of the political wing. In Bangladesh, I did the commercial wing. My exposure has been varied in these two postings that I've had. Of course, there is ground for specialization if one so desires. For example, you can specialize in the atomic program and in our dealings with the IAEA in Vienna, and the various aspects of the current nuclear negotiations. The government does not prevent you from specializing. However, if the government feels that you need to represent India in another aspect, we must be ready to step up and do the bidding of the ministry. Yes.
In IAS and IPS, after some time, people go for other deputations, the central postings and inter-state deputation, and sometimes they get postings in PSUs as chairpersons.
Yeah.
Does the same apply to in foreign service also?
Yes, we do have options to go on deputations. I think there are a couple of posts which are reserved for foreign service officers in the Ministry of Defense, in the Ministry of Commerce, and certain other places. I think in the Prime Minister's office there are certain vacancies where they prefer foreign service officers to serve. And then there's the whole gamut of training programs where you can specialize. There are the NBC programs in New Delhi and in Wellington that our officers can go to at different levels of seniority. You can go on a sabbatical to Washington, to California for certain specific foreign policy related courses or courses in international law, which many of our officers do. So the opportunity to move out into certain other fields of work quite different from what we do in the Ministry of External Affairs, is always available.
What about political interference? Because in IAS and IPS, that's one thing people often worried about. Does the same applies to foreign service? Like, how does the political executive interfere with your function?
Um, in our system of government, we have the legislature, the executive. So, in a sense, our minister, the external affairs minister, is the leader who sets the agenda, the tone of how things are to be done, and we look at him as a father figure, and a parental figure for guidance on how to go about the execution of the foreign policy. Interference, I would say, is very, very limited in the foreign service. But of course, as political masters, they all have their inputs into how we function and execute our, foreign policy. Yes.
And generally, in certain services, people have a saying that the chances of getting corrupted is much more. Like revenue service and all, there is people always say that. Of course, you can agree totally. So when it comes to chances of getting corruption, how do you rate foreign service? Like, what is the situation?
I really wouldn't be able to comment on what other services do because I'm not too aware of what other services do. In the foreign service, to the best of my understanding, we have robust systems to keep our dealings transparent and free of corruption. So. One of the major initiatives, I think, has been the complete computerization of many of our dealings, anything from the purchase to purchase of items, even projects which we implement abroad are all computerized. There's a tremendous amount of transparency that has come. Whether it is in the passport system, in the e-migrate system for workers who are going abroad to work. Computerization has, by and large, ensured transparency, and therefore, as you would agree, prevented any corrupt practices from cropping up.
We are in a lockdown stage now, and we are living in a world of pandemic. So, and because of the globalization, all this happened. Like something happens in China, spread out throughout the world. Such a situation we are, and in that scenario, how do you see the future for a career like yours, like a foreign service, in a world of globalization and pandemics?
Yeah, it's been quite a new experience. It's a new experience for anybody. So, and for us, in the ministry, I'm really proud to be in the MEA because the ministry has really stepped up and risen to the occasion. For example, the Vande Bharat mission has brought back about 1 million people to India. Launched about 3.5 months ago. There was a lot of initial skepticism whether India will be able to bring back its nationals who desire to come back. But then down the line, 3 to 4 months down the line, what we see is about 1 million people have come back. So that is one role where the Minister of External Affairs has really stepped up, and I know for a fact because we have so many of our colleagues who are doing this day in and day out for the last 3.5 months with no break whatsoever. A second aspect where I think the ministry has really risen up is in the field of international cooperation in handling this pandemic. We have supplied equipment and personal protective equipment and other things to countries which need them more. We have sent, the hydrochloroquine tablets to several countries which have needed them because we have a huge manufacturing base here for the chemical. So we've really risen up to the challenge, and it's been a new experience also because meetings, including joint commission meetings, which is like the highest level at which we take our relations, have been held between the Honorable Prime Minister and the Prime Minister of other countries virtually. So it's a totally new experience for us. We are finding new ways of doing it. Even in my office of the Protector of Immigrants, where we are grappling with the situation of returning workers and the authorized recruiting agents are finding it difficult for their day-to-day operations. Several of our meetings have been online, and I think it's still a learning process. But I think in the areas where we are required to step up, we really have stepped up, and I'm really proud of the fact that the ministry has gone up to this level.
Thank you, Vijay. And I think that have helped you to understand some of the finer points of the service, and hope you will be able to understand more if you watch things closely related to foreign affairs. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.